Blitzkrieg, the lightning from the west.
But before we start, please support us by pressing like and subscribe buttons. Also turn on the bell notification to get the latest updates. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you.
In the cold gray dawn of September 1st, 1939, the thunder of artillery shattered the stillness of the Polish countryside. Without a formal declaration of war, German forces surged across the Polish border, launching what would become one of the most infamous military campaigns in modern history. This was not a slow grind of trench warfare as the world had seen in 1914. It was something faster, fiercer, and far more devastating. The Germans called it Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, a term that would come to define the terrifying efficiency of Nazi aggression. With this strike, Adolf Hitler lit the fuse of World War II. The stage is set. The seeds of Blitzkrieg were sown in the bitter soil of the Treaty of Versailles. After World War I, Germany was left humiliated, disarmed, and economically crippled. Hitler, rising from the embers of a defeated nation, built a regime fueled by resentment and a promise of revival. By the late 1930s, Nazi Germany had rearmed, annexed Austria, and dismantled Czechoslovakia with barely a shot fired. The Western powers, Britain and France, clung to a policy of appeasement, hoping to avoid another catastrophic war. But Hitler's ambitions were boundless. To the east lay Poland, rich in land and strategic importance, and the next step in his vision of Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. Behind closed doors, Germany had secured a secret non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In it, the two totalitarian powers agreed to divide Eastern Europe between them. With the USSR neutralized, Hitler was free to strike westward. The storm breaks at 4:45 a.m. on that fateful morning. German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte, near Danzig, now Gdansk. Simultaneously, waves of Luftwaffe bombers descended from the skies, hammering Polish airfields, railways, and communication hubs. On the ground, three massive German army groups surged forward, spearheaded by panzer divisions and followed closely by mechanized infantry. The attack was swift, precise, and terrifyingly coordinated. The Blitzkrieg was unlike anything the world had seen before. Instead of traditional battle lines and drawn-out sieges, this strategy relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force. Tanks smashed through defenses, aircraft obliterated supply lines, and paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines. Poland's forces, brave but outmatched and under-equipped, were unable to mount a cohesive resistance. Within just a few days, the Polish command structure was in disarray. Refugees clogged the roads, retreating units were cut off and encircled, and major cities fell one by one. Warsaw, the capital, endured a brutal siege, with Luftwaffe bombers reducing entire districts to rubble. Yet the defenders, both military and civilian, held out fiercely. The Western response: too little, too late on. September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany, fulfilling their treaty obligations to Poland. But it was a hollow declaration. There were no immediate military offensives in the West. This period would later be dubbed the Phony War, or Sitzkrieg, marked by a lack of major action on the Western Front. The Allies had vastly underestimated Hitler's willingness to wage total war and failed to prepare an effective counteroffensive. For the Poles, this lack of support was devastating. They had hoped that the British and French would attack Germany's western border, forcing Hitler to divert his forces. Instead, Poland was left to face the onslaught alone. On September 17th, in a final act of betrayal, Soviet forces invaded Poland from the east. The Red Army poured across the border under the guise of protecting Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities. In truth, it was the implementation of the secret clause of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Caught between two invading giants, Poland's fate was sealed. Fall of a nation by the end of September, the Polish resistance had been crushed. Warsaw surrendered on the 27th after weeks of relentless bombardment. The final Polish units capitulated in early October. In just over a month, the once proud nation had been dismembered and occupied. The Blitzkrieg had succeeded beyond Hitler's wildest expectations. His gamble had paid off, and the world watched in horror as the map of Europe began to change under the boot of Nazi militarism. But this was only the beginning. The Blitzkrieg doctrine. At the heart of Blitzkrieg was the idea of combined arms warfare. It required meticulous coordination between ground forces, air power, and logistics. Germany's panzer divisions, fast, heavily armored and equipped with radios for instant communication, were the vanguard. Supporting them were dive bombers like the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, whose terrifying sirens demoralized enemy troops before the bombs even landed. This doctrine shattered traditional military thought. Defensive lines were bypassed, strongholds surrounded and isolated rather than assaulted head-on. Enemy morale was broken not only through destruction, but through psychological shock. Blitzkrieg was not just about speed, it was about breaking the enemy's will to fight. The human cost behind the sweeping success of the German war machine was immense suffering. Tens of thousands of Polish soldiers and civilians were killed. The Luftwaffe targeted civilian convoys, hospitals, and infrastructure, blurring the lines between battlefield and homeland. Jewish communities were subjected to immediate persecution, and German SS death squads began the systematic murder of Polish intelligentsia and political leaders. The invasion marked the beginning of the Holocaust's first brutal phase. Refugees flooded into neighboring countries. Families were torn apart. Entire villages disappeared beneath the weight of bombs and tanks. For the Polish people, Blitzkrieg was not just a military strategy, it was the apocalypse. Lessons ignored. Despite the clarity of what had occurred in Poland, many in the West failed to grasp the true nature of Hitler's strategy. Some believed the war could still be contained, that diplomacy might prevail. But Blitzkrieg had already rewritten the rules of modern warfare. When Hitler turned his gaze to Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and eventually France, he applied the same methods with devastating effect. The lessons of Poland, ignored or misunderstood, would come back to haunt the Allies in 1940. Conclusion: a lightning that shook the world. The invasion of Poland in 1939 was not just the start of a war, it was the unveiling of a new era in military history. Blitzkrieg was a revolution in combat, and its success emboldened the Nazi regime to pursue ever more aggressive campaigns across Europe. It shattered the illusion of peace and exposed the vulnerabilities of nations clinging to outdated strategies. But Blitzkrieg was not invincible. In time, resistance movements would rise, strategies would evolve, and the tide of war would turn. Yet the impact of that first lightning strike, of tanks rolling over Polish soil, of bombers darkening the skies over Warsaw, would forever remain etched in the memory of a world plunged into chaos. The lightning had come from the West. It came fast. It came without warning, and it set the world on fire.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.